Greetings ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to my Total War Warhammer Nordland lore video. Now today we're going to be looking at the province of Nordland. Located in the northwestern part of the Empire, Nordland finds itself at the frontier of the war between the Empire, the forces of Chaos, and Norscan raiders, often acting as the shield of the Empire itself. Nordland was not a founding province of the Empire, however. It was ruled over by the Was-Teutones, and these Was-Teutones once kind of ruled the whole area of Nordland, the Wastelands, and Midland. But the Teutons came in and took over the Midland area, driving the Teutones out to the areas of Westerland, Nordland, and even into the area that would become Ostland. When Sigmar went on to forge what would become the Empire, the Teutones were not initially part of that effort. They did not join Sigmar and did not take part in becoming part of the Empire when it was first founded. It wasn't until the rule of Sigismund II, known as Sigismund the Conqueror, that he in fact marched into the lands of the Teutones in the Wasteland, what would become the Westerland and Marienburg, and north from Midland into what would become Nordland, and subjugated the Teutone people and brought them into the fold of the Empire. This would have been in his reign, so between the years 479 and 505 of the imperial calendar, so approximately 2,000 years before the current Total War Warhammer timeline. In terms of some of the history of Nordland, Nordland, as we mentioned, was sort of founded by the Teutone people. They were subjugated by the Teutons and forced out of large parts of their land, and eventually, when the Great Plague struck the Empire and Manfred Rathunter had to unite what remnants of human beings were left with the following Skaven invasion of much of the Empire itself, Nordland found itself the victim of Norscan raiders. But this time the raiders didn't just raid and go back to Norska, they actually stayed and started to set up settlements. And so thinly spread were the forces of the Empire at this point that the new emperor just didn't have time to send forces to drive the Norskans out of Nordland. So to a certain extent, the Norse population over the centuries integrated itself into Nordland as a province, meaning that the people of Nordland have now a combination of Norscan, Teutone, and Teutogan blood. They're kind of a hodgepodge of these different peoples. This was not the first, and it would not be the last time that Nordland came under Norscan attack. Probably the most famous of these near-constant raids every season was when Valkyr the Bloody rode with an army of Norscan raiders in the year 2398. The size of this Norscan raiding army was so large that the nobles of Nordland got wind of it before they rode across the Sea of Claws. Knowing that a Norscan raiding party led by Valkyr the Bloody was imminent, the nobles decided to hide out in their castles and not march forward to meet the horde that was encroaching on the Empire territory. This left essentially all the smaller towns, the farmland, the peasantry of Nordland completely vulnerable and with no means of being able to defend themselves for this incoming horde of chaos. Out of these common folk, however, a hero emerged by the name of Harold Dreitzacker. Now, Harold was just a common fisherman, but knowing that the nobles were not going to come to the aid of the common folk of Nordland, he put together a force of commoners and managed to arrange to have them armed, and indeed managed to organize some form of resistance against this oncoming threat. Eventually, the long ships of the Norscan raiders set sail across the Sea of Claws, and as they approached the coast of Nordland, Harold and his ramshackle army rode out to meet them and fight them on the high seas. Now, Valkyr, being on board the lead ship for Chaos, spotted Harold's flagship and with one immense spear throw managed to shatter the entire ship he was riding on. Now, the ramshackle army Harold put together still put up a good fight. They fought valiantly and bravely to defend their homes and their families. However, it looked like they were on the verge of being overrun by the Norscan raiders. At this point, a dwarf ironclad appeared and started blasting the longships out of the water, really effectively saving the day, and Valkyr was banished back to whence she came. Harold himself survived the massive spear-throwing explosion that he'd been exposed to at the hands of Valkyr the Bloody, and went on to become something of a folk hero in Nordland. However, his life was not long-lived after this battle. It's said a few weeks after it, and no one's quite sure what caused his death, but he was found dead, and rumors were rife that it was either Valkyr seeking her retribution and revenge for the defeat she'd suffered, or that the nobles of Nordland itself had killed Harold because he was becoming too much of a popular hero, might cause some sort of uprising, and they couldn't have anything like that. So Harold still lives on as a folk hero in Nordland to this very day. In terms of the geography of Nordland itself, Nordland is really split between two large forests. The forest that dominates the eastern part of Nordland is known as the Forest of Shadows, and it is a dark and dreadful place. It has a reputation of people going missing. There are known to be giant spiders living in the forest. Beastmen and worse erupt from the forest's edge from time to time, causing untold mayhem upon the citizens of Nordland. And all of this disruption makes it a very hard forest to get a lot of timber out of. And now timber, just due to the vast woodland they have at their reserves, is one of the primary exports of Nordland. The other forest that dominates the central and western part of Nordland is the Laurel forest. And although this makes up part of the province of Nordland, it is in fact its own independent realm. And there are a community of wood elves that live in this forest. Now, what the wood elves are exactly doing in Laurel rather than Athel Loren, I'm not 100% sure. It's not made 100% clear to me in the lore, but one presumes maybe they got sick of occasionally, once every few centuries, going to war with tree spirits, so they maybe moved to a forest that wasn't enchanted, or is maybe just slightly enchanted, or is just enchanted by their own magics rather than actual living walking trees going around killing them from time to time. So maybe they just wanted a piece of quiet. That's the story I'll tell myself in my own head anyway. The Wood Elves of Laurel share a cordial relationship with the nobility of Nordland, and there's in fact agreements in place that allow human settlements in and around the forest of Laurel. However, the Wood Elves do have veto power on which of these settlements are allowed to exist, and they are able to regulate how much of the forest resources these settlements are allowed to take. So they can't overhunt, they can't cut down too many trees for their lumber, and so the Wood Elves are kind of just in charge of the region, despite the fact that it counts as part of Nordland. However, this has irked some of the human population in Nordland, and there are some illegal settlements that spring up from time to time, and this has caused an increasing degree of tension between the government of Nordland and the Wood Elves of the Laurel Forest. In terms of the other geographical features of Nordland, it does have its desolate and barren shoreline to keep it company, obviously always facing across to Norska and the ever-present threat there. The Sea of Claws causes weather of rolling fog and frequent storms to batter the coastline and the towns and cities that inhabit it. A number of these coastal communities, however, make a scrounge a living from some half-decent fishing that can be had in the Sea of Claws, and there are a community of wreckers who, for those of you who don't know, are people who lead ships astray and cause them to run aground on rocks and then go and salvage what's left of those ships once they've run aground and crashed or been destroyed. So that seems to be a fairly regular occupation in Nordland. Now, this has caused a degree of tension with Marienburg, as a number of the ships crashed against the coast of Nordland happened to be Marienburg trader ships looking to trade with Nordland itself, or perhaps even further across with Kislev at Ehrengrad. Probably the most prominent town on the coast of Nordland is the town of Dieterschaffen. Now, Dieterschaffen became the most important harbour to the Imperial Navy upon the secession of Marienburg. Once Marienburg became an independent city, the Imperial fleet anchored itself mainly out of Dieterschaffen. Now, they tend to focus mainly on repelling Norscan raiders, rather than necessarily prioritizing looking to trade westward to the Elves. Now, Dieterschaffen itself, having sort of received this honor relatively recently in the long-term view of things, is really trying to recover and build itself up to the point where it has an effective naval shipbuilding program, and they're looking to improve the facilities at Dieterschaffen all the time. But at the moment, it's the central hub of the Imperial Navy and where most of the Imperial Navy is anchored out of. Another town of interest is a little bit further to the east of Dieterschaffen, and that's the town of Neues Emskrank. Now, this town was not always called Neues Emskrank. It was once called Pugsblatter, which is a funner sounding name if you ask me. But in the year of the Imperial calendar, 2460, it was just a simple fishing village. And along came this chap called Jens Peter Riemann, and he put together a little collection of investors. He apparently had several elect accounts in this group, wealthy merchants from around the empire, and his idea was to build a kind of massive, significant new trading port and really look to rival Marienburg in terms of centers of commerce. In order to do this, they put together this huge pot of money. They kicked out all of the old, smelly peasants. They tried to move in new, naval experts and merchants and, civilized people into their new town. They began to rebuild vast swathes of this town. They built warehouses that were going to inevitably, of course, store all these trade goods that were going to come through this town. And they looked to build a number of different ships as well to act as sort of merchant trading companies. However, from almost the onset, the entire construction project was besieged with problems. There was a flood, there were fires that broke out, ships would be newly built, row out about 100 yards into the surf, and then just capsize. And eventually, after years of this, they just said, screw it. We're going to give up. This is a failed investment project. And they, in fact, arrested Jens Peter, and he is now residing in debtor's prison. He's described as a charlatan, but I think that's a little bit harsh. Some theorized, however, that it was sabotage, and sabotage by the old residents of old Pugsblatter, who just didn't like being kicked out of their town and like to see this new project fail. Now it's kind of a bit of a ruin, the town. It's gone back to being a small fishing village, but all these half-finished buildings have gone to ruin, and it's just a bit of an abandoned wasteland over half of the town. But there are still some fishing villagers and families that operate out of Neues Emskrank. The next town that has quite an interesting history in Nordland is Schulaghügel. That's my best effort at that one, guys. I'm sorry if I got that wrong. But Schulaghügel was founded about a couple of generations ago and is currently run by a chap by the name of Baron von Hagenfell. Now, Baron Hagenfell, knowing that this town was actually quite prosperous at one point under his grandfather, wanted to, re-inject it, reinvigorate it, and have it resettled. So he placed 40 families into the town, and at first it looked like everything was going swimmingly. The Elves of Laurel Forest seemed to be putting up with the new town, and really it was all going well. It was thriving, it started to open up trade routes, it all seemed to be going swimmingly, and then suddenly one evening, bang, nobody's there. There's no families, there's no children, and the Baron sends a team to investigate, and they can't find any bodies, no sign of violence, and more oddly than that, no animals, no dogs, cats, pigs, cows, nothing. There's just no living creature left in this town, and no hint of what might have happened to them, except for 2 words carved into a tree in the center of town. The words were fog and mercy. That's all that's known of the mysterious town of Schulaghügel. Moving to the town of Schoten. Now, Schoten is a popular way stop along the way for travelers going on the Middenheim-Ehrengrad Road, which is a popular trade road in the Empire. And so a lot of traders stop off, a lot of huntsmen who tend to be hunting around the Bramble Hills just to the south of Schoten, tend to stop off there for a bit of a rest to sell their pelts and furs, and then to go back out into the Bramble Hills. There's a very popular inn in Schoten known as the Brombeerstorch Inn, and it is run by a peg-legged dwarf by the name of Augustus Hargrimson. And now Augustus got the right to run this pub for the entirety of his life from the local baron, whose life he saved when the baron was being attacked by a wyvern. It did cost the dwarf his leg, but it got him a bar to run in the meantime. Now, he's opened up a number of services out of the bar. It can host many stagecoaches, and he brought along a couple of his clan brothers as well, one of which works as the blacksmith, much to the chagrin of the local human blacksmith. Now, Augustus also happens to have apart from running one of the most liked inns in Nordland, also happens to produce the best beer. So a good place to stop off on the road if you're traveling through Nordland. And the largest settlement of Nordland is, of course, Saalzemond. And Saalzemond comprises of a tall castle built on top of a hill where the Elector Count of Nordland makes his home, and where he can oversee the growing town of Saalzemond beneath him. It's in fact rumored that the tower is so high and the hill so large that the Elector Count of Nordland can in fact see the entirety of the province from his high vantage point. The keep of Saalzemond, where the Elector Count makes his name, has earned the nickname of the Jutone's Nest, named after the tribal people who founded the province. A lot of the income of Saalzemond comes from the trade revenue through the Middenheim-Ehrengrad Road, and all the benefits that brings into Nordland. And one of the primary exports of Saalzemond is the timber from the Laurel forest, which is said to be extraordinarily light and extraordinarily durable. So that's exported out of Saalzemond, as well as a lot of silver. And there's a good sector of silversmiths within the town itself, with a lot of silver coming out of the region of the Silver Hills, just to the southwest of Saalzemond. And these silversmiths' craft and ingenuity have gained them a sterling reputation across the empire itself. Saalzemond also has credit in terms of religion. Saalzemond is the home of a 2,000-year-old temple of Ulrich, completely made out of wood. It's said to be 3 stories high and hexagonal in shape, and it has a smaller version of the eternal flame, like the one found in Middenheim. Now, having a flame that burns eternally in a wooden structure really does surprise me that it's been standing for 2,000 years, but there you go, one of the oldest temples to Ulrich still standing, made completely of its original wood structure, and the Nordland people themselves do hold Ulrich probably as the most important god in the pantheon of the human gods. Unlike their southern cousins, they don't tend to focus on Sigmar as much, although there is Sigmar worship in Nordland. The current high priest of the Temple of Nordland is a chap by the name of Eirik Granholm, and he is the high priest. He has a bit of a high opinion of himself, thinking himself the equal to the R. Ulrich based out of Midland, but only in his own eyes. No one else thinks of him that way. The government of Saalzemond is really run by a council of guildmasters and landowners, and they tend to appoint a leader as a kind of day-to-day manager of the goings-on in Saalzemond. Of course, he is under the authority of the Elector Count, but has some authority in his own right as well. And the title they give this chap is the Burgermeister, and at the moment, this is a man by the name of Maximilian von Kritscheslag. And he's running the day-to-day operations of Saalzemond underneath the supervision of the Elector Count himself. In terms of the people of Nordland, as I mentioned, they come from this kind of blend of mixed ancestry, with the Jotuns, the Teutons, and the Norskans. Culturally, they've absorbed traits from all 3 of these different ancient tribes, and even the Norskan influence can be seen in many of the architectural and cultural aspects of Nordland today. Many of their houses along the coastline are designed from Norskan longhouse designs. Trial by combat has ever been common in Nordland, and they've adapted the tradition whereby they lay down a white sheet, and the first person to bleed on that sheet is the loser of the duel, so it's not necessarily to the death, their trial by combat. And they've taken the ancient Norskan custom of bragging contests, and really that has evolved into a kind of competition of genteel storytelling. And indeed, this tradition has become one of the defining traits of Nordlanders, who are reputed for their storytelling ability throughout the empire. In terms of their speech, the Nordlanders are very loud and frank, and they lack any kind of subtlety or tact. In fact, many of their local folklore tales really revolve around heroes blurting out the truth at the last minute, which looks to encourage the lack of any need for lying or even polite deception for that matter. People outside Nordland attribute this behavior to Nordlanders being too stupid to lie, whereas the Nordlanders just see themselves as solid and straightforward folk. This even translates to their trading skills, whereas in other market towns within the Empire, one might be expected to have to barter for trade goods. In Nordland, you'll just be met by a barrage of the same price repeated in increasing volumes. This method has known to faze many merchants from around the globe who have prided themselves on their bargaining ability, but when just faced with a loud beration of the same price over and over again, they tend to fold fairly quickly. This mixing of the bloodlines that's kind of produced the Nordland people has also made them into powerful warriors, but much of the Empire also regards them as slightly barbaric and don't necessarily trust Nordlanders around their daughters or their sheep, hopefully not for the same reason. This kind of derision when looking at Nordlanders, they take very personally and tend to, I don't want to say overcompensate, but make a point of proving their loyalty and their value to the Empire as a whole. This has mean they've often turned up at battles being some of the fiercest warriors around. There's a famous example of the Battle of Frot in 2421 of the Imperial calendar, where a regiment of Nordland pikemen couldn't wait to get involved in the fight with Norscan raiders and ran out in front of the entire army, promptly getting themselves killed in the process. Now, the lesson learned here by Empire generals was if you have your Nordlanders, try and treat them as though they were dogs on a leash and hold them at the back until you are happy to unleash them upon the enemy horde, but expect no control thereafter. Due to the nature of Nordland itself, with its forests and hills, they've become very respected hunters and foresters. And here's a Nordland saying, just to give you an idea of, their kind of approach to life. One famous saying of theirs is, "A soiled conscience soils breeches," which is a kind of roundabout way of saying only the guilty have something to fear. And that about sums it up for the people of Nordland. All in all, a hardy bunch, very much acting as the shield of the Empire, fierce people with some Norscan blood in their veins, but still fiercely loyal and glad to be part of the Empire as a whole, although they were latecomers to the party. They are, of course, led by the Elector Count, Theodric Gauser. Now, Theodric, the Grand Baron of Nordland, the Prince of Salzenmund, and the Lord of Laurel, as well as holding the title of the Duke of Marienburg and Terror of the Norskans, holds the title the Duke of Marienburg, but really has no real claim on it. He does have a claim, I suppose, but it's not really enforced. He isn't ruling Marienburg. In fact, if he sets foot in Marienburg, I think the penalty for him will be death, as things stand currently. But a lot of Nordland nobles have collected these titles from all around the Empire just to kind of feed their ambitions, really, but not much attention is paid to them, and they don't rule over these lands that they hold claim over. Theodric, like many of his nobles, does have huge ambitions for Nordland. He looks enviously upon the power of Middenland to the south and wants to emulate that kind of influence and be really the most powerful province within the north of the Empire. His ambition reached its pinnacle when he started to amass a large mercenary force, as well as the standing troops he already had at Nordland, with eyes of launching an invasion of neighbouring Hochland to increase the reach of his province and its power and influence. Getting wind of this potential civil war, Karl Franz sent Balthasar Gelt to the court of Theodric. Now, Balthasar kind of made himself a welcome guest, but just as he was getting ready to leave, thinking up this very, sly little plan, Balthasar decided to turn all the gold Theodric had in his vaults into bars of lead, and promptly, and rightly so, fled Nordland, probably never to return. Now, having no more gold with which to pay his mercenary army, Theodric was forced to abandon his ambitions of expanding Nordland and taking over a province of another Elector Count. So civil war was averted by Karl Franz and the quick thinking of Balthasar Gelt, but Theodric hasn't let his ambitions go and is up there really kind of thinking of ways to expand the power of Nordland. He's known as a fierce fighter, often riding upon a griffin into battle, well respected on the battlefield, but must be kept in check by Karl Franz for the good of the stability of the Empire. And although his martial skill is respected by most of the other Elector counts, they do sometimes mock him, as it could be argued that half of his province isn't even directly under his control, with the independent realm of the Wood Elves lying smack bang in the middle of it. And that's really all that's really known about Theodoric. He's an interesting character. He wears that interesting gold skull cap. It looks pretty cool. I hope we do see him as just a unique model, not necessarily a legendary lord, but much like Boris is at the moment. He's playable. If you confederate, you can get him as a general. But apart from that, he shouldn't really be a legendary lord, just a lord you can get for your army if you want. And yeah, I think he's quite a cool little character and runs a cool little province. And that about sums it up for Nordland, really, guys. Hope you enjoyed that video. And as always, please do subscribe for more Total War Warhammer content. And I look forward to catching you on the next one. Do drop a like if you enjoyed this video. It really helps the channel out. And see you next time. All right, guys. Thanks very much.